Must be a real story. Craig Jeff is here.
We have a distance run out with you guys.
I thought that we were enemies.
Oh yeah. Just trying to keep you guys included.
I don't know.
Cover down the far seat. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Brigadier General Tony Cucolo, I'm the Chief Army Public Affairs. We know that after the Secretary of Defense's briefing yesterday, you probably had a lot of questions. He did mention that we would have an Army press briefing this afternoon. That is that briefing. And our senior panel member today is Lieutenant General James J. Lovelace. He is our Chief of Operations. And with him today, to his right, is Major General Thomas G. Miller. He is the Chief of Operations at Forces Command. To his right is Mr. Stan Steenrod from our Director of Resources, the G8. To General Lovelace's left are our Personnel and Human Resources team, Colonel Dennis Dingle, Director of Human Resources Policy, and Mr. Roy Wallace, Director of Plans and Resources in G1. And with that, I'd like to turn the panel over to General Lovelace. Sir.
Thanks, Tony. Hey, first off, thanks for being here today. What we want to do is make sure that y'all understand what the policy is as opposed to what it is not. And what we want to do is make sure we give clarification on why and the justification. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense announced that all active duty Army units now in Central Command, area of responsibility, and those headed into that AOR would deploy for not more than 15 months, and then they'll be able to return home for not less than 12 months. That's a very important piece here. The Army asked for this change, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Secretary of the Army, and together they realize this is a difficult decision. After careful thought and deliberation, they know that this is a hard decision for those that are deployed, whose families are back at home station, and for those that are about to deploy, thinking they were going to go for a year. We've been at war for over 5 years now. American security and Americans' future is at stake. We're in it to win. That's our mission, and we take this very seriously. And our soldiers and their leaders deployed now understand this. With the current rotation plan and this plus-up, we faced a situation with increasing probability of sending combat units into the AOR that did not have enough dwell time, and we'll make sure y'all understand what that means, at home station in order to get trained. And so what the Army leadership was faced with was a trade-off between how long they stayed in theater versus ensuring that they had sufficient time at home station, because what we say is, our standard is that you will not deploy unless you're the best trained, best equipped, best led force. And so we faced already, though, an increase in extensions even prior to the plus-up and this uncertain duration. And I know all this well. Some of y'all I know, I've been doing this for 2.5 years, and y'all have been here with me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn to the screen up here, if you don't mind, because I'm going to begin to lay a cornerstone of what was about dwell. You know, yesterday the discussion resounded about between extensions or what was then going to be less time at home station. And so all I want you to do here is, this is how we build a ready unit. This is the pieces, the integral pieces, the algebra that as you add it up, what you see is that this is a unit, they come home after having transfer of authority. What you see is their equipment arrives, the soldiers are basically going on a block leave, And during that next several months, what we're doing is we are resetting the unit. We're not only resetting the equipment, but the leaders are leaving. They're going away to school, professional development. We're getting new leaders in. You're getting new soldiers in. Basically, we deploy each unit with about 40% combat veterans. And so also during that time is when we began to lay down the basis for individual training. Once you get all your equipment and then you're fully manned at appropriate percentages, then we begin a collective cycle that leads to a mission rehearsal exercise, MRE. And you can see where that falls. That falls just about 4 or 5 months prior to the time that a unit is now deploying again back into theater. And then on the back side of that 12 months, about 10 to 11 to 12 months, then the equipment is prepared for deployment, and then it's shipped. The soldiers go on block leave, and then they go latest arrival date, and you can see the legend right at the bottom. And so that's the 12 months. That's the 12-month calendar. That's the 12-month life cycle, and that's why we need to now maintain the sanctity of those 12 months. Now, next slide. You can see that if we had to now go to an abbreviated dwell in theater, dwell back in home station, you begin to truncate off pieces of this. All that means then is instead of having all this time to train collectively, what do you have to do? You now have to insert the pieces where you prepare to deploy and ship your equipment. Make sense to everybody? And so that's why then yesterday the Secretary of Defense, upon the recommendations of General Casey and the Acting Secretary of the Army, Mr. Guerin, established the policy about ensuring then that what we had was a 12-month dwell back here at home station. And then that caused then was the policy to extend units up to 15 months in theater. And so that's the operational cornerstone. And what I'm going to do now is we understand then what we are asking of our families, of their leaders, and of the soldiers. But we want to now also address then the things that we as an Army have a responsibility to do, is to take care of the soldiers and their family. The first one I'm going to have address is Roy Wallace, and he'll talk about compensation.
All right, if we could have the next slide, please. What I've tried to do here is to break out, take a soldier's pay, and I've picked a staff sergeant here in E6. And one of the cornerstones that Secretary Gates talked about was compensation. And what you have in the middle column is what the normal soldier deployed to Iraq gets. And when you look at that, it's about $780 a month more than a soldier that's just back here in the United States on any one of our post camps and stations. But when you go over this 12-month time period, the compensation shifts. And another $200 is added to hardship duty pay, and another $800 is added to assignment incentive pay, for a total of $1,000. So the added incentives for being, or compensation for being extended over 12 months in country, involuntarily by the Secretary of Defense, ends up being $1,780 per month per soldier as we go through this.
What I'm doing now is have Colonel Dennis Dingle speak. Dennis has been the lead for the Army as we've extended both the 172nd Striker Brigade up in Alaska, and also when we extended the 1st Brigade, 34th Infantry Division, the Minnesota National Guard. And so that's why he's here today. He's going to talk a little bit in general then how we're going to address the needs of the family. Please, sir.
Thanks, sir. First of all, I'd say our purpose with the Tiger Team is to continue to show the Army's commitment to soldiers and families. We recognize that extensions in some cases cause extraordinary circumstances for soldiers, and our garrisons and our rear detachments do a tremendous job of supporting soldiers and families during deployment. But when the 172nd was extended, a decision was made to stand up a Department of the Army Tiger Team, a multidisciplinary Tiger Team, and as the slide says, to reinforce the capabilities of the unit and the garrison. Next slide, sorry. They have the responsibility for supporting our soldiers and families, but they also have the capabilities of the Department of the Army behind them to take care of those extraordinary circumstances that face our soldiers and families. Some of the things that we were able to do is streamline the processes and not have all of the issues go through the ordinary channels to get to the Department of the Army, and we were able to quickly fix a number of those issues that face our soldiers and families. You'll see on the slide we talk about several of those. One of them is assignment instructions. As our commander in Alaska said, there were 3,700 soldiers, and when they were extended, there were 3,700 new plans for those soldiers. And we made a commitment on part of the Army to ensure that those soldiers would continue on to go where they were assigned, to go where they were going to school, that their families had some certainty that their follow-on assignment would remain the same. We also saw soldiers and families who incurred expenses directly as a result of the extension, and we were able, through secretarial authority, to provide reimbursement authority for them so that they did not lose money directly as a result of the extension. We continue this Tiger Team operation today. It's here at Department of the Army. It's prepared to support soldiers and families for these units who have been extended in theater, and will execute those operations, do the right thing for our soldiers and families.
Hey, real quickly before we turn it open for questions, this is about winning. It's about the Army's task is to field forces for victory, and it's about ensuring then that they are trained, ready, equipped, best trained, best equipped, best led force. And we do that by maintaining the 12 months dwell back at home station. We consider this, the senior leadership of the Army considered this in making the decision for a long war which is unknown duration right now. And so it's to give sustainability to the force, it's to give flexibility to the commanders, and it's to give predictability to the soldiers and their families. So,
I think you all know me, and I know all you, so just get my attention, and I'll get you the question. I'll let the first question go to AP Bob Burns. I see you, Pam, I promise I'll get everyone. Go ahead, Bob.
General, why didn't you include the National Guard and Reserve in this new policy? And by having essentially a two-tiered system, are you creating perhaps some friction between those who are going to have to serve 15 months and others who will be given 12 months?
hey, it's a good question. You can see that we went through a series, the Secretary of Defense went through a series of decisions. We established first the mobilization policy, the remob policy for the national, for the RC, which was a 12 months mobilization. That was important. You know, at the heart of your question is really about what are setting the expectations of service, and those expectations were set appropriately for the National Guard, and who are reserve soldiers. At the same time, then for our active soldiers, they understand their commitment, and therefore understand then that is their full-time job day in and day out.
You don't see any situation you're creating where you have a different standard for different soldiers who are in the field doing the same things?
As the Secretary of Defense said yesterday, this is but an interim step to get us to the opportunity where we can go 12 months boots on the ground, 12 months dwell, and ultimately where we get ourselves to 12 months boots on the ground, 24 months dwell.
Pam, go ahead, UPI.
To follow that question, what relationship is there between the decision to limit the Guard to 12 months on the ground and this? I know that in January when that decision was made, it was made immediately, and it did cause perturbations with the active duty, because when you deploy a Guard unit for 12 months total, that limits actually their time on the ground to 10 months or 9 months with the training that goes on either end. So did that decision impact the decision to extend the active duty?
The answer to your last question first is no. All right, and it might be a little bit difficult to understand that. What the policy did that the Secretary issued on 19 January basically gave us assured access to the reserve components. It allowed us a remobilization policy where we could assure then the appropriate contribution of the reserve component for each rotation. That was not there before. We were remobbing flags, but we were not remobbing units. And at the heart of that was maintaining the unit cohesion, the integrity of the unit. Those were the additional points that laid inside of that mobilization policy, which allowed us then to be able to mobilize a more ready reserve component formation.
Tom Bowman, NPR.
General, you keep hearing from people that the Army's overstretched, it's strained. Some say it's breaking. And although your recruiting and retention numbers look good, I'm just wondering if going to this 15-month tour, are you worried you're going to see some slippage in recruiting and retention? And to Mr. Wallace, you mentioned $1,000 extra a month. Do you think that number is sufficient, or are you going to look at increasing perhaps that number?
You want to go first, sir?
I'll let Roy go first.
Right now, that is the Department of Defense policy, and right now I know of no efforts to increase from the $1,000 a month that has been set forward right now.
So you think it's sufficient?
We do believe it's sufficient now.
But to your point, you know, we look at everything for the moment in time. We do assess at each moment. Each day is different, so we assess each day differently. And so, but to your point, y'all know the statistics. The active component is exceeding its mission. It's exceeding our reenlistment goals. The USAR is basically coming up a little bit short on its enlistment, but the National Guard is recruiting great guns and also retaining, and so is the USAR. And so that's an overall great picture for the health of the force. And so now for the future, is there concern? Just as the chairman talked about yesterday, the answer to that question was yes. And so, but we need to be appropriately on guard for those kinds of things.
Fox News, go ahead.
Mr. Wallace, with regards to the $1,000 a month, is that money going to be tax-free? And if it's not, do you think it should be?
It is tax-free in the combat zone. To every enlisted soldier, all of the pays that they get are tax-free. For an officer, up to the Sergeant Major of the Army's pay plus the hostile fire pay is non-taxable. So unless you're a senior lieutenant colonel or a colonel, pretty much for the officer corps, all of your money is tax-free too.
Louis, go ahead. ABC News.
Yeah, yes, sir. I believe you mentioned that you faced this challenge even prior to the plus-up. Can you run us through when you decided that, or you first gave consideration to this idea beyond just the individual unit extensions and decided to go with the blanket extension plan?
What we're referring to in this incident is that basically we knew that the demand or requirements that were coming out of CENTCOM, we saw this, have been seeing this. We manage the force on a quarterly basis. I mean, we look at this in a very dedicated way on a quarterly basis. So, and we assess then what is the requirement that's coming out of theater. So we began at that time to see, as the demand was exceeding the supply, then what we were going to need to do was either extend or break dwell. And that's why then we knew going in that what we would need to do is how do we preserve the integrity of what was the 12 months back at home station. And so we saw that and have seen that as we were walking into this position for the plus-up.
Unforced Press Service,
So two questions really. First, we talked about units going in for 15 months. I'm just curious, are the individuals who go in from the Army, are they under the 15-month rule too? In other words, a person being assigned to a headquarters somewhere by himself, would he go in for 15 months?
The answer to that's yes.
And
So
the second,
let me help clarify this for you. Basically, for those like NMCI, you're going for 15 months, and you know, in other words, Ray Odierno's headquarters, they're there for 15 months. The divisional formation headquarters are there for 15 months.
up to that,
Basically, we're working through what are all the permutations of that right now.
And for Colonel Dingle, you know, it's one thing to have a Tiger team that's taking care of 3,500 members and their families from Alaska, but you're asking, this is a far larger task. Do you think it will still work, given the numbers of people that are affected by this?
Yes, we have a pretty good handle because we've been to Alaska and to Fort Drum and in support of the 134th. We have a good idea of what those issues are and have socialized those issues with our major commands, with our garrison commands. And our Tiger team structure is both boots on the ground and virtual, and so we have the experience and the resources here at the Department of the Army to support the installations and the units and the soldiers and families.
Hey, if I could just add to that a little bit.
Sir.
Basically, we have standards of service out there in all of our garrisons. In other words, that they have to perform to a certain level and standard. And so what Dennis is really referring to is that then that it is incumbent upon those garrisons to begin to absorb those responsibilities, those lessons learned, as we began to teach them on what it is that unique things that they're going to have to address. And so that's why he means. In other words, we're going to take on the first several, and then after that, what we hope to do have institutionalized this. Not hope, but we will. We'll have institutionalized this as we go across the force.
So before we move to the next question, were you addressing WIAS specifically, Worldwide Individual Augmentee System? I was reminded of what that.
No, I was talking just, the Brig and Central Command AOR.
Okay, David Cloud from New York Times.
General, two quick questions. One, there was reference yesterday to 2 brigades that are currently in Iraq, I believe, that would not be extended for 15 months. Can you just tell us which ones those would be, just to clarify that? And then second, there was also reference to, with the policy change, being able to sustain the current force level in Iraq through the end of next year. And I just wanted you to kind of parse that out a little bit. Does that mean essentially by the end of next year you will run out of combat brigades who have been at home for a year, as and would have to go back for 15 months? In other words, you'd have to extend beyond 15 months at the end of next year?
Can I answer the first question, the easier question first? All right. There were 2 brigades. One of them was in Iraq and the other was in Afghanistan. Okay. And one of them is the 310 Mountain out of Fort Drum, and then the other is the 1st and 34th, which was the Minnesota National Guard. Both those units, had already been extended. The 310 Mountain had been extended for 120 days, and then they're being backfilled by an already announced the 173rd out of Italy. And just the ability to get there the physics is too hard, and so but we're going to try. But both of those, while the message was very clear, the intent is to try to carve as many days as we can out of that based upon what is the final transportation plans. But with 134, that was the Theater Security Brigade in Iraq, and they were extended for 124 days. And it's just the ability now to move forward the unit that's replacing as quickly as we can. And we have the mission to see how much of that we can carve off. So, then your last.
On the second one,
I've got the
extending the surge.
I remember when it was. I was just teasing with you here. So, what the question was, because you're asking the question, perhaps that the way the Secretary of Defense asked it, they asked him how long we're prepared to do this, and he said for about a year. And then he came back and he said a year from now, and his answer was yes. And all that we're being asked to do right now is to presently build that capability to be able to sustain this through next year. All right, and so that's the limits of advance, because what it is, like he said, it is conditions based. They are making habitually, periodically assessments on the ground, and as they make those assessments, then they decide how many forces you need.
No, but I'm not asking whether it in fact will remain at current level. I'm asking, do you have the capability how long do you have the capability under the new policy to sustain the current force levels in Iraq?
Good question. I'm not going to answer it. All right, fair enough.
Gentlemen, wait a minute, Tom. Gentlemen, Pam has, might get you, Tom. So go ahead.
Thanks, General Lovelace. A couple of questions on a subject weighing heavily today in the news. I'd like to get your thoughts on the green zone attack today and indications on how explosives might have gotten into the checkpoints there and into the convention center. And secondly, are these attacks, with all of the security that we have in place and the diligence that's been in place there to do that, are these attacks just a risk that everyone will have to live with, potentially?
Sir, I'm going to have to answer you. I would have to get back. Let me tell you how my day has been. I've been on the Hill testifying this morning. I came back and conducted a requirements board, and then I came right to this. And so I'm aware of the incident. I am not aware of the details, and so I would not want to speculate this time. I'll prefer, if you really want, then I could get back with you.
In general, then, is this, given all the security that we're all so well aware of, is there just a certain level that we can get to, and then it's just something we have to be prepared for, no matter what security we have put in place?
I've been over there a couple of times. I've been over there more than once. The security is very good. And I'm not familiar enough with the details right now to really address. I would feel a little bit immature for me right now to leap into an answer. But the security is superb over there. This is done in a very thoughtful way. I mean, they adapt the security plans accordingly. This is a thinking enemy. But on the other hand, again, some pretty smart young men and women over there who also, you know, we are lucky. We have the best soldiers in this world. They are a treasure. And at the heart of what we're all talking about today is preserving that. They are the spirit of the United States Army. And so, and that the spirit is because they do adapt themselves. They think. They're there to win. They're there to do their mission. We're very fortunate to have their service. So.
Tony?
I wanted to go back to first principles here. Back in February, March of '03, what were the Army assumptions about how many brigades it would be in Iraq in '05 or even today? General Melcher has a chart, I think, from your office that had some and some. But what were some of the assumptions? How do they vary from today? You know, just for a historic baseline here.
I have seen the chart, but the chart is classified, now those are not Army assumptions. Those are coming out of theater, and those are probably a little bit more appropriate to be handled by the Joint Staff. I mean, all I do is respond to the requirements. We knew, again, getting back to the question I think over here is that we knew at a point in time is that if the theater requirements sustain themselves at certain levels, even though we had in place strategies that we thought were perhaps going to now be different, then we knew that we would have to now begin to do things like extend or break dwell. And the preference here, the trade-off is to extend.
Okay, just one follow-up. Just for those who don't follow every brigade size issue here, how many active duty brigades does the Army have? How many will be committed to Iraq by mid-June when the surge units come in? And how many brigades does that leave you for contingencies around the world should emergencies arise?
It's approximately 41 active duty brigades.
No, look at it. I know the number. I'm just I wasn't wanting Carl to answer. I'm being careful. All right. Anybody can tally up the number of brigades that we have right now. We've got in the high 30s available. All right, and we're building out, as you all know, 242. We're building 2 more as we speak. We started those at Hood and we started it at Fort Riley, Kansas. And then behind that come 2 more. That gets us to what was going to be the QDR strength. All right, so that kind of gives you the number. And you know what the grow the Army number is, which is to 48, but that takes over the palm until fiscal year 11. And so you can count up the brigade flags. You know, we run about 13. We've got 2 more AC active component formations in Afghanistan, and we've got another deployed in Korea. And that's basically where we are right now. And then of course, we've got the, we a little bit overlooked, but we have 6 brigade equivalents for the National Guard, all right? And then we've got additional capabilities that they provide to train the Afghan National Army in Afghanistan, and they also take care of the formations both in the Sinai and in the Balkans.
I got a classified slide up there too, Tony. Can
Yeah.
you see everybody's hand? The gentleman in the purple next, and I'm going to work my way around. Go ahead. Purple tie, go ahead, sir. Okay, Ann, go ahead.
Thanks. Just to sort of follow up on that, sir, if I know the Army always plans for the demands in Iraq, if they stayed the same, given the projected growth in brigades and increase in brigades, then how long would it take to get to a 12-month tour, 12 months dwell, and then to the 12-month tour, 2 years dwell?
You're talking about the demand would have to go down. I mean, that's the real variable in this regression equation. That's the greatest degree of variance is with the demand. The demand would have to go down considerably before we can get to that. Although we're growing the force, and that was part of what was the Secretary of Defense's decision back here in early January, based upon a decision by the President, was to grow that force. Demand has to go down.
Could you give a sense of, I mean, it is sort of a mathematical equation. How far would the demand have to go down? So in other words, you could never get to that sustaining this level. So how far would it have to go down?
It'd have to go below 15.
Mike, not seeing that.
Sir, since the war started, the Army's seen an increase in desertions. Can you talk a little bit about if you've kind of looked at what this extension plan will do to the desertion numbers for the Army? And second, have you also examined what the cost will be per year for this extension plan?
I'm going to pass this one to Roy, but I'm just thinking nobody's going to desert, I hope, in Iraq. But, as we hope nobody was going to desert also with us in Korea, because, hey, you're going to get off the peninsula. I'm sure Mr. Wallace wants to answer that question.
We'll take a shot at that one here. I believe what you're talking about is this year's figures are higher than last year's figures. But if you go back in time and you look even before we started this, and you go back to 1999 and before, you'll see that the numbers are relatively the same as they are right now. So is that a spike or is it not? We've gone back to historical norms is the way that we look at it with the force. And we were growing the force at this time too, so I have a lot more people that are in the force right now.
Have you taken a look, though, at what if you might be looking at increased desertions? Is that something you look at?
Every month, the Army G1 goes through all of the statistics, whether it's desertions or it's other things that we look at to take the pulse of the force, whether it's sexual assault or the other things that we worry about a lot. And we are looking at this one really hard. But when you look at it and you compare it to history, yes, it's more than it was last year. But when you go back and look at before the war even started, we're right about where we always have been.
I have a second question about the cost.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
The cost of the extended time in country, if you've broken that down to what that will cost per year.
I don't have a cost figure. I don't know if.
No, I think it's a little premature. What we're doing is we're going through all the units. When you look at this, it's first based on whether a unit has been extended, okay? But then you have to go inside of that unit, and you look at the individual soldier. And some of these units have people that have gotten there and been there only for 6 months. So we're going through by Social Security number right now to take a look at that to put a cost on it. So we're not there yet.
Michelle Can, Army Time.
Could I just say one thing here?
Yes, sir, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I guess the way I look at this, I would answer your question would be this way. Every kid that's coming in now has come in since, most of these skill level 1 soldiers, all these young people that are predominantly are the ones going, they have volunteered to come in since 9/11. They know what they're getting into. That's why I think we look back at it in a historical perspective. And so that's kind of how we look at this. There's not many things that y'all can ask us that we're not looking at. We might not look at it the same way, but but again, I think the question is appropriate, but you can see how, we put it in a little bit of a perspective. So.
Michelle, go ahead.
A couple quick questions. I want to clarify this.
Hey, do y'all know there's a couple of people on this panel here?
I know.
Yeah.
Three
Let's make sure y'all.
This applies to MiG teams as well, sir, correct?
Yes, it does.
And then the Secretary mentioned yesterday 5 brigades that might have had to deploy before the end of their 12-month dwell time. Can you name those 5?
I can't name off the top of my head, no. Right.
Get those from somebody.
Call me, I'll see if I can get that for you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, talk smooth, go ahead.
Just so I understand, sir, if the surge were to end, would you need these additional 15-month deployments? Or would you be back to a stage where you could go back to 12 months?
I mean, it's implied that once it's conditions based, all right, and the conditions are going to determine then, how much forces you need there, and then that will determine, then when we can start bringing troops out, and so we respond to what the combatant commander tells us they need, and so once the conditions and things get better, then we start coming out.
Could I just clarify on that? If you were to go to 15, would you automatically go back to a 12-month rotation, or would that just be a separate decision?
Okay, see, what we said is that we were headed already.
Right.
See, And so we would had, you know, so somebody's going to have to extend anyway. And so that's why I was that was the preamble to the earlier, I forget whose it was, but preamble to the earlier question. See, we were headed towards extensions anyway, and then with the plus up, it's created.
So it would not be an automatic, obviously, an automatic. You wouldn't go back to 12 months if you got down to 15. It would be a separate kind of decision.
That's why whoever asked the question about the numbers, you know, you can see it with the based upon supply and demand, you know, because and it's not exactly. You can't put them head to toe. See, because you overlap by 40 days or so in theater. See, it's about 1.15. So.
Tom Bowman.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the earlier questions about Secretary Gates saying this could go into next year. Could you maintain this, you know, beyond that indefinitely if you have access to guard brigades? Could you just keep going after next year?
So I think what the Secretary said was, and I'll confirm, but I did read what he said. Now, what he said was, he said, how long can you do this? And what he said was for another year, and then from now. That's what do
you say?
And well, I'll say the same thing the Secretary of Defense says, but no. But let me no.
If need be. Or does it get to a point where you're just basically wearing out the service? Is there something that you?
Sir, you know that, and it's been said, we are stretched right now, and that is a fact.
But I'm wondering what would stop you from continuing into, 08? What would it? Would it be the concern about recruiting and retention? Would it be soldiers saying, "Listen, I've done 2, 3, 4, 15-month tours. I'm not going to do anymore"? What exactly is it? Is it that concern?
We have this wonderful thing called the all-volunteer force, and that is something that has been with us now going on the fourth decade. And the preservation of that wonderful thing called the all-volunteer force is so important. But at the same time, that all-volunteer force is here to do one thing. It's to win. It's to win on behalf of our nation. We've got great young men and women, and right now they're sticking with us. And so when you ask me the question, we're entering into a little bit of uncharted territory here. And that's why all the questions about concerns, are there concerns? You bet. As we all have sons and daughters, friends and relatives, and you know, who are serving overseas. And so we are very, very aware and need to be appropriately of this thing that we have here, this very wonderful thing, this all-volunteer force, who represent the best of this country has to offer. And so we're not careful with it. We don't treat it like China, but on the other hand, we understand then how we have to take care of it. And that's why then, as we walk ourselves into, we will do what this nation asks of us, and we will win. No question about it. And that's what every young man and woman over there want. They want to be part of a Super Bowl team. They want to win. They don't have free agency here. What they do have is they've joined something that's bigger than themselves, and they realize it. And that's why once they come in, they stay. And that's why they're continuing to come in. So.
But it sounds like you're saying if you go beyond next year, you're worried
So
about breaking the.
I did not say that. As I say, this is like as we're walking towards finding out where the edge of this is. That's what we're doing. We're trying to find the edge.
Sir, we are asking a hell of a lot of a really precious resource there. I would imagine if you find that things are, maybe re-enlistments aren't as high as they once were, or maybe you're not recruiting the numbers you need, the Army is prepared to sweeten the pot. Is that the case?
You coming my way again, boss?
The answer to that is that that's kind of what we've been doing. We have incentivized. We understand the market. Hey, y'all have had the former chief walk y'all through this. Y'all understand then between the ages of 18 and 24 what the market size looks like. It's about 2.4 million people. You understand how many of those are actually eligible to become in the armed forces. It's less than 1/3. And we're competing with what? Those who want to go to college. This is a premier market. And so, you pay market price. Right. That gets to your point.
Absolutely. It's economics.
But I don't. The point that I want to be very careful of, I do not want this Army characterized as a mercenary. No, it's not that. It is. These are young men and women who have in their hearts something about selfless service, who believe in what this nation is about. And so I don't want to put a price tag on it. I want to make sure we treasure what the spirit of this force is, and it's about what they believe in, not about what you pay to get them to serve.
So we have time for two more. Ann's going to be the first one, then we'll go to Tony, and then we're going to be complete. Go ahead, Ann.
So in hindsight, do you think that a decision should have been made earlier to increase the size of the Army? And at what point, at what point do you believe that the new units, the new brigades that are going to be coming online, at what point could they provide any relief for the situation?
Well, you know what we've done is basically, we went into this with the General Schoolmaker, and the plan was to basically grow from 33 to 42 and make a decision point then to whether we were going to go to 48. I mean, that was kind of the original plan. And then that we then got to a point where we plateaued at 42. And so we're still building. I mean, can you imagine where we would have been if we had not made the decision several years ago to build this force in the way that we had? We would not have had these additional brigade combat teams that could have rotated in and out. And so everybody asked a question about, the decision to grow the force that we made it several years ago. Hey, we've been trying to grow this force. I mean, y'all have heard this. This is not new. We were trying to grow this force for several years. We're only at about, as of today, 507K, 507,000 people. And so that's where we are, and so that's with I want to say a lot of effort, but it was with effort, and so now we're going to grow this force to 547, and that's where we're going to go on the AC, and it's 358 with the National Guard, and 206 with the USAR. And so when we say that we made this decision, we did make this decision, and to me we were at a point again where all we did was springboard off of the platform within which we'd already built. So it was really a guy who's been there. I've been here back in the Pentagon for 5 years, so I've really kind of seen this whole thing here. Is that it was just a normal en route march across phase lines here up to intermediate objectives to what is at least another larger intermediate objective about growing the force to 547,000.
So with the 7,000 approximately additionally coming on every year, I mean, will that provide some relief, or is it just?
You bet.
I mean, so when would that happen?
I mean, but y'all see the math. I mean, we're going to grow the force until fiscal year 11, and in the fiscal year 11, it's only I think it's only 1K because we've grown the force basically predominantly through fiscal year 10. It grows the force in a very slow way. All I'm trying to say is that we're growing the force. One of the things we want to do is maintain the quality, so.
Tony, you get the last question. Go ahead.
It's become a cliche that the Army is a broken force.
He asked too hard a question.
What are some of the leading indicators you watch for whether, in fact, the Army is deteriorating in terms of retention and recruitment figures? I'm thinking of retention of like NCOs and captains and everything. What are the fair leading indicators that all you gentlemen watch to see if, in fact, the Army is deteriorating?
Well, you want to start off, and then I'll finish
we
up?
can. You mentioned recruiting and retention. We measure that in infinite detail as we go through by recruiting station, by part of the country, by ethnicity, by everything, because we recruit the entire strength of the Marine Corps every year. So it's pretty big business for us, and we go after that. We look at all what we call the bad things, and I can probably let Colonel Dingle talk about those because he deals with a lot of them. But we look at desertions. We look at sexual assaults. We look at
drug and alcohol.
Drug and alcohol.
Indiscipline.
Right. And we measure those and go through those at least on a monthly basis as we look at those. So we take the temperature of the United States Army in 1,000 different ways every month to see if we can pick up any cracks in the armor or get an azimuth on where we're heading. And like General Lovelace said, we've grown half of our goal already in combat. So we've done some pretty amazing things over the past few years to get ourselves into the position and position ourselves for the future. I'll let someone else take over.
Yeah, I'll just finish up with the question. I mean, we do. I mean, we don't leave a stone unturned. Not Brig. I mean, we don't leave a stone unturned. I mean, whether it's in the Surgeon General's arena, whether it's in the morale welfare that lies both, that spans both the G1, the personnel, or in General Wilson's area, which is in the installation management. They have programs, family programs, that they then have a responsibility for taking care of. All those things are then have visibility to the very senior leaders inside the Army, and then those are shared with the very senior most leaders, with the chief and the secretary, as long as with the vice and the undersecretary of the Army. Those people see those kinds of things, and so in order to now make sure that we are maintaining the integrity and the health of the all-volunteer force.
Is there any trend line, though, that's troubling at this point? You paint a picture of a force that's able to replenish itself at the time of war, but are there one or two trend lines that you're concerned about?
I would say no. I mean, generally, the ones that we watch in my directorate are relatively steady state. I mean, we'll see rises and falls as we go over time, but none come to mind as Mr. Wallace said, taking a historical perspective that are way off the charts. That doesn't mean there aren't some that are increasing, and we're continuing to watch them closely and adjust our programs and services in support of our soldiers and families to address those, but not that I see that are off the charts.
Gentlemen, thanks for coming today. I appreciate it, sir.